Alright, so now let's get to start writing our code for the dig game. So the code that I have for you has the majority of its program setup, especially the parts that take care of the client connections, login, and and that sort of things, as well as your UI. However, we'll learn about programming for our specific plugin, which is a dig game plugin that we wrote. Remember, the dig game plugin is a plugin on the server side, and it's written in Java. So if you want to know what this plugin essentially does on your server side, just go ahead and check the server folder of the game book that I have put on the blackboard, and you'll be able to see what essentially the server or the Java side code does. Our program basically on the client side will communicate through the plugin. So basically learning about player logins, the actions that each player would take, and the parameters of those actions are going to be communicated through the plugin. Alright, so let's go again through the logic of this program. Again, we have a main function. The main function basically creates a game flow class. The game flow class, which is here, takes care of the basic functionalities of essentially creating an electroserver object and a dig game object. I'll talk about dig game later. And then initializing. In the initialization, the server.xml file will be loaded, which will have the IP and the host address. This protocol will be set, and the event listeners for connection event, login response, and connection close events are going to be created. Now, in the onFile loaded, we create the IP address and the host and the port number of our host, and we create the connection of the electroserver. Then, when any user attempts to connect, we give them a name and a random number. That would be their username, and we send the login request to the server. Once the login request is created and sent to the server, if the user is logged in, then we create a dig game class. We assign our electroserver object to the electroserver object of the dig game, and then we initialize the dig game. Now, before I go talking about the initialization of the dig game, let's take another look at our plugins. In our plugin, we basically create a class of constants, and we essentially give a name, meaningful name, to the strings or the values that are going to be passed and sent back and forth between the plugin on the server and the client. So, for example, action stands for letter A, dig here stands for letter D, done digging stands for letter DD, and so on and so forth. So now let's take a look at the dig game class. In the dig game class, what we do is basically we have an electroserver object, a room, a player manager, and a player list, an item holder, a trowel, and a username, and also three sound classes: dig sound, or rather sound bytes, dig sound, found sound, and nothing sound. We go about and we add our event listeners essentially to the dig game class. So we have an event listener for when a player is added to the object or to the stage. We call the onAddedToStage function. And then on the onAddedToStage function, we basically create two event listeners for the stage. One is when mouse is down, and one is when mouse moves up. And basically these functions take care of the movement of the mouse and the clicks of the mouse. And we'll see how these two functions basically work. Initialization of the dig game basically takes care of creating the background for the game and creating the user list user interface, the item holder, which is basically a little trowel, which is basically a little object, and then the trowel object, which is a little spade that we dig with. Now the first thing that we need to do in this class is to add our ElectroServer event listeners for the joining room and the plugin events. So we add two event listeners of the type message type join room event, and the join room event is going to call on join room event handler, and the scope of this function is the entire class here, and the onJoin room event handler is the one down here that I will be populating later. And the other event listener that I need is the event listener that takes care of messages that are coming from the plugin. So we have a plugin message event that would call on plugin message event, and again the scope of this event handler is on plugin message event, and the on plugin message event is the one down here that is called when a message receives from the plugin. Alright, and so this is good, and then at the end of this initialization, I'll just join the users to the room. Okay, now let's go and write our join room function. The join room function creates a room that is called dig game room, and it creates a dig game plugin for it. So in this join room function is when the user is connected, I basically go about and create the room request. So it's going to be a variable called create room request, and it's going to be from the type create room request. And then we will set the name of this room and the zone of this room. So CRR set name, set room name, and we call this a dig game room. And remember, all the users are going to join this room. And then we create set zone name, and we call this dig game zone. Now remember from our previous example, when we created the room, those were the properties of the room that we needed to set. Now for this room we have a plugin, so we need to create the plugin for this room. So next thing is to create the plugin. So what we need to do is to create a variable. We call it plugin request, and it would be called plug in, and we need to set its properties. So the first property that it has is the extension. Set extension name, and the extension name is called game book. Remember, that was the extension that we installed in our server. Then we need to set the plugin name, and the plugin name is called digging plugin, and the plugin handle is going to be also digging plugin. And finally, now that the room and has been created, we need to set the plugin, set the room's plugins. So to do this, we go and we call CRR create room request set plugins, and we've just passed to it our plugin here since we have one. If we had multiple, then it would pass all of those multiple instances. And finally, send the request. So it would call electroserver send CRR. So the create room request will be sent and the client will be joined to the room. Alright, let's test this program now. Okay, now the player joined the room. Wonderful. And as you see, the trowel shows, but we don't have any functionality with it because when I press the mouse button, I would have to send a request to the plugin. I haven't set that up yet. And all the events that will be happening. Alright, now we will go and we'll write the function or the event handler for join room. So what happens when the users join the room? So the onJoin room event first stores a reference of the room so that we could work with it. So remember, with this class we had an instance of the room which is up here, so we need to set that instance. So we go down here on the onJoin room event, we set the room instance to be the room argument that is passed to our object. Then we tell the plugin that we are ready and we need to initialize the object. So we create a variable es object, and the type for this variable is going to be an es object, and then we set this variable's properties. So es object dot set string es object, and we set es object dot set string, and the string will be plugin constants dot action and plugin constants dot initme. So this will initialize my my plugin electroserver object that is going to be passed to it, and then we send to plugin my electroserver object that I just created. Now in the send to plugin, what I will do is that I will go ahead and create a plugin request, which I already have here, and then I populate my plugin request. So my PR dot set es object is going to be my ESOB. Actually, it's going to be ESOB. Yes, I called it ESOB as well. So ES object goes in, and then set room ID is going to be room dot get room ID, and PR set zone ID is going to be room dot get zone ID. Okay, and at this point, my plugin request is ready, so I send this plugin request to my server. And then in order to debug, I trace my Electro server object. Okay, so now I created the join room function. I created the join room event. So once the user attempts to connect, the join room event is handled. A room is created. Electro server initialization message is going to be created, sent to the plugin, and then the plugin request is going to be created with the Electro server object, the room ID, and the zone ID, and this is going to be sent to the server. So here's what is going to happen. Alright, my next step is to create the handler when messages are received from plugins. Basically, when I log in, when a user logs in and sends the initialization message, and then whatever is going to happen afterwards. So on the plugin message event, basically is where that's the event that's going to be fired when a plugin message is received on the client. We need to create an Electro server object and populate it with the content of the message that's coming from the client, from the server plugin, and then essentially try to see what we should do by parsing that message. So first off, we will basically go about and create our Electro server object. Alright, and then we would create a actually we don't new it, we just read it from e.getES object. Right, so this will get my Electro server object. Then I create a action string which will be the get string of my Electro server object, and I will read the string that has my plugin constants dot action. And then we just parse this action out. So we have a switch statement on action, and we test several cases. If it's a plugin constant dot done digging, we would call the handle done digging function with ES object sent to it, and break. If the case was plugin constants dot player list, then we handle player list with the ES object sent to it, and we break. If the case was plugin constants dot add player, we handle add player with ES object pass, and if the case was plugin constants dot remove player, we call the function handle remove player ES object and break. And if the message was a plugin constants error, we handle error with the ES object passed as the argument, and in the default case we basically send a trace debug action not handled. Alright. Okay, and at this point I have the handle player list already created. Handle remove player, handle add player. I will go about and write the handle done digging option here and the handle error options there, and the rest of those options are already created and populated. Okay, so if when we sent the questions from the plugin to the plugin, or sent strings from this client to the plugin, or back, and something was wrong, we would basically create a mechanism to take care of the error. So first thing that we need to do is to create a variable, a string variable, and I call this error. It's a type string, and this is going to be ESObject.get string plugin constants dot error, and we run a switch statement on error case plugin constants dot spot already dog trowel dot stop digging, that stops the animation, play sound you nothing sound, and update trowel position. And the default case basically shows a trace of the error, error. Alright. Okay, now let's go and write the handle for done digging, and we will be very close to finishing our program. So the function for handle done digging basically will grab the initial information from the electroserver object. So we'll create a string called name, this would be coming from the ES object dot get string plugin constants dot name, and then we create an integer variable, we call it score, and that also called from ES object dot get integer plugin constants dot score. Okay. Next, we will find the player and update their scores properly. So we create a variable of the type player, and that would be player manager dot player by name, and you would find the player with the name. And then we set the player score equals score. Now we test to see, now this updates the score for the players. And then we test to see if this is the current player or this client who received this message is actually that player. So we go if player dot is me if this was in fact the player, we would stop the travel animation, and then we test to see if there was an item found. So we create a Boolean variable called found that would come from ES object get Boolean, and it would come from plugin constants dot item found. And we would test if an item was found, then we would get the item ID, which would be an integer, and we read that also from ES object get integer plugin constants dot item ID, okay, and then we go ahead and we show that item on the screen. So we create an item, and the item dot item type item ID. Let's call this my item. My item dot x is equal to dot x. My item dot y equals dot y. And then items holder dot add child my item. And now that we set the item, we just play a sound. Play sound. New found item. Found sound. And if an item was not found, we'd just play the not found sound. So we go play sound, new, nothing sound. And finally, we update travel position. And then we rebuild the player list since the scores have been updated. And I think this should be pretty much it. Let me just go over this and see if I have everything set. Okay, let's run our program. Oh, okay. Okay, there is an error here that my plugin is not being created. And publish to, oh, okay. Okay, in the send to plugin function, I need to specify plugin name that I'm sending my messages to, and it was called digging plugin. Okay, and now, awesome. Now I have my program written. So user joins in, user list is updated, travel shows up, and the information, whenever I have any information passed, that goes through the send to plugin, as you see here, from the room, from the player, and the zone and the plugin. The message goes back and forth. And if a new player joins in, as you see now, a new player joined in here, so the list of the two players are now updated properly. Now, as you see, if I attempt to dig somewhere that some other player had already dug, I would not be able to perform the action. Okay, so good deal. We wrote a server authoritative program. We didn't really write the server-side logic. Essentially, server-side logic was the logic that came with the server plugin, and as you see, all these information here are from the server side, and we only worked with the client side, which had very little logic to it, but it essentially maintained the list of the players, it maintained the score, and it took care of the actions that were passed to it from the server side. Okay, well, I hope that this was an informative project and showed you how to write some program, some code on the server side, on the client side, using plugins. So with this, I let you finish up your programs and submit them through the Blackboard. Thank you.